Okay, hopefully everyone can hear me. This is Disclosure Without Engagement, an empirical review of positionality statements at FAccT. This is work done in part with my mentor at Microsoft Research, Solon Barocas, and a wonderful undergrad, Akshansh, Pareek. So the context here for this work is that computing, of course, is trying to be more reflective as a whole. We're seeing the rise of adverse impacts, and ethics statements are becoming more common, and in some venues they're even required. One of these mechanisms that we see gaining popularity are positionality statements in computing. So what is positionality? It's the idea that our background and experiences shape the way we see the world, and thus the research that we do. It's an idea that originates from feminist qualitative scholars and became popular in the reflexive turn in the 1980s. And positionality statements are an artifact to operationalize a discussion about positionality. They're a statement that are included in a research paper, sometimes in both review and the final publication, that discloses and discusses aspects of author positionality and a discussion of impacts on the work. So, as Alexandra mentioned, this takes us to the present moment at FAccT, when the 2024 chairs, including Alexandra, authored this blog post suggesting that responsible AI research needs impact statements too. One of the recommendations was that RAI papers should include researcher positionality statements, and authors were also recommended to include a discussion of limitations, ethical impacts, and adverse impacts. So our research questions were as follows. Did this work? How often do authors include positionality statements in their papers, particularly in response to the recommendation in 2024? 2, which facets of identity and background do authors disclose? And third, how often do they relate these disclosures to a discussion and description of perceived impact on their research? So the moment you all have been waiting for, we want to know, data and methods. To look at this, we reviewed all papers from 2018 to 2024, all years of the FAccT conference, searching for keywords, positionality, and reflexivity. The resulting data set was 82 positionality statements over the whole history of the conference. Within this, we annotated each paper for a variety of features, including the presence of a positionality statement, whether or not there were industry authors affiliated with the work, whether the paper was focused on a community or a particular identity group or not. And then within positionality statements, we looked at a long list of disclosed features related to identity, training and background, and geography. Now we have the moment you've been waiting for, which is the finding that the 2024 recommendation did work. On the x-axis, we see the years, so we actually don't see any positionality statements at FAccT until 2021, when we see just a couple. And we see a massive increase, both relative and absolute, in the number of positionality statements in 2024, likely as a result of the PC recommendation. This is a stunning finding that this recommendation worked. Next, you might be curious what kind of disclosures are made in positionality statements from FAccT. And first, what you're looking at here is a histogram of all of the disclosed features grouped by kind of the category. So in red, we see features organized by research experience. So we see that the most commonly disclosed features relate to academic background, relationship to subject matter and research motivations, and the most commonly disclosed identity features are gender and race, followed by a long tail of features related to personal geography, identity, and research experiences. This might serve as kind of at least an initial reassurance that people aren't using positionality statements to give a laundry list of identity disclosures, for example. People are genuinely looking at academic background, relationship to subject matter, and so on as the most common things described in positionality statements. Second, though, we see a disjunct when we look at how often these disclosures are connected to impacts. So the lighter histogram bars that you see here indicate for that feature how often the feature is actually connected to an impact described in the work. So as you can see, although academic background is disclosed or described in over half of positionality statements, in just 15 of those is academic background connected to a directly described impact on the work. We also see that a lot of identity features are not described in terms of impact either. So gender and race, for example, are disclosed pretty frequently at 20 times and 19 times, and are only connected to impact 6 times each. To make this a little bit more concrete, what we're talking about when we're looking at these disclosures without engagement and impact are kind of exemplified by these two examples. The first is one that focuses on disclosure. This is a positionality statement in full that discloses that the author is white, uses he, him pronouns, and is based in Europe. His work is committed to accountability, inclusion, and fairness. By contrast, this one shares a lot more about how their positionality engages with direct impacts on the work. So as white women academic researchers from Europe and the US, our personal backgrounds shaped how we selected research questions, analyzed data, and the manner in which we interacted with study participants. A contrast we think is important here is that all of these disclosures kind of leave a vacuum for the reader to potentially impute impacts of those disclosed features on the impacts of the work that we worry might actually rely on essentialist notions related to this person being white, he, him pronouns, and based in Europe. By contrast, we find it really useful that race, gender, background, and geography are directly connected to relationship with participants, scope, and analysis here in this second positionality statement. This is just an excerpt of this second positionality statement. We next got curious about what kinds of impacts are actually described in connection with disclosed positionality features. This is quite a complex figure. It's probably easier to read in the actual paper, but I'll quickly just share that we connected every single disclosed feature to a described impact on the work if it was present. And the most common described impacts on research include analysis, scope of work, and relationships with participants. Some are much more common than others. Some findings that we think are particularly interesting and important for this academic community are that the influence of industry is rarely discussed in positionality statements from papers with industry authors. We know that this community's relationship with industry is a subject of repeated discussion, and we think it's important to note that authors either weren't engaging or didn't feel this was the right way to engage or couldn't engage with the impact of industry on their positionality and approach to the work here. Second, we see political commitments and activism are often discussed in these papers, which makes a lot of sense given the fact that a lot of researchers in this community are both scholars and activists. However, we note that some of the types of disclosures that we see in these positionality statements may increasingly put researchers at risk. This is not a new phenomenon. Researchers on the topic of positionality statements have noted this for a while, that these kind of disclosures can put an additional burden on researchers, and we note that especially given the political environment in the United States, this is something to think about as we think about shaping policy. Finally, some statements use deterministic language and frame lived experience as credibility. I don't have time to get into it. We share some of these examples in the paper, but we think it's important to note when some positionality is framed as determining or constraining an aspect of the work, when it's important that researchers also take responsibility for methodological decisions, even as they engage with how their positionality shapes the work. This brings us again to 2025. In 2025, you might have noticed that the chairs requested no positionality statements be included during review as part of their anonymization policy. First, we think it's interesting that this potentially might suggest disagreement with FAccT about how to address positionality statements within the FAccT community, and that maybe this is an opportunity for us to surface this for a transparent discussion that brings in more stakeholders over this sensitive topic. This, of course, also tees up future work because we now need to know how this change impacted the frequency of positionality statements this year at FAccT. Of course, folks ask us for recommendations as part of this work, and we include a few based on our empirical review. One is that clarity is needed in the policies in order to make sure everyone can operationalize the guidance appropriately and feel that their methods are not being comprised. We also think it's important to assure optionality given the additional burden placed on researchers that we note as a result of these disclosures in the current political environment. Second, we recommend that the community seek input across opinions on this sensitive topic, as well as methodological backgrounds. Opinions on this topic, of course, are fraught even within qualitative research. There's a lot of controversy about this as a mechanism of discussing and engaging reflexivity, and we think that ensuring that different methodological opinions and stances are included is really important in ensuring that the FACT policy addresses everyone's needs in future years. We also know that positionality statements, one criticism of them is that they can be seen as a tick box exercise that happens after the work's already done. This is a major concern. So we're wondering, again, this is such a unique community. This is my first time here seeing craft as a site of kind of engagement before and as we plan research could be a way to engage reflexivity and train researchers who might not have otherwise been doing this in reflexivity, separate from positionality statements. And finally, of course, this was our approach here, but we think evaluating the interventions and recommendations we make can help us make more informed choices about policy at the conference in future years. In that spirit, we're making this data available for reanalysis. Given the sensitive nature of the data, we're not posting it online, but we do have an access request form, and we hope that others can learn from this data as well. Thanks very much. We hope you'll engage with the paper more deeply, and again, data requests are available here. Thanks so much.
Thank you.